Joining us today is Jim McCutcheon, president of Copiana. How's it going, man?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Very good. Like we were just talking about, good Braves win yesterday, so can't complain.
Yeah, certainly in Atlanta, we can't complain.
When
Uh,
this comes out, hopefully, the Braves will.
have another series win. We'll see.
Very true. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as we kind of set the stage a little bit, our big topic for today kind of is this idea of vertical farming. But before we get there, I'd like to hear a little bit about, who are you? Tell us a little bit about Copiana, kind of what got you inspired to even start Copiana.
Yeah, actually, it kind of goes way back. I guess that's the starting point of it. When I was in high school, right here in Atlanta, and I'd take my trip to go to school every day. I used to pass this little farm right along a very busy interchange today, and I was always fascinated as to what was going on that farm. I always loved to see the different sizes of the crops and when they would do their harvests and all the various things that were going on. I always found it really fascinating. And then one day, it was just gone. And today, if you drive by that location, there are $1 million homes on that site. And, not that there's anything wrong with that. I mean, that's progress, if you want to say it that way. But it always had me wondering, where did that farm go? Did they just stop? Did they move? I mean, what's happened? And then when you think about that and you expand that thought, it's like, frankly, where have all the farms gone? I mean, they keep getting pushed further and further out of the urban environment. So I always had this desire to try to bring urban farming back, farming back into the city, if you will. But traditional farming doesn't really work. There's not the space for it. We don't necessarily have the light. There's all these variety of things, code issues, whatever it may be. So never was very successful with it until I discovered vertical farming and found a system that I really enjoy. Spent a lot of time researching it, playing with it. My wife thought I was nuts with all the things I put in the front yard, trying to figure it all out. But then ultimately realized, she and I worked it together and realized that, this is the answer. And ultimately we created Copiana. And today we farm on commercial properties. We are farming inside of lobbies. We're farming on rooftops and courtyards, parking decks, conference rooms, any number of places, anywhere that you can imagine, pretty much, we can farm. And we're bringing that kind of hyper local produce to folks, which is more important now than ever.
I think that's a great reason to get started. I remember when we first talked, it was interesting to even hear about kind of that origin story of kind of looking to the past of where these farms used to go. Before we kind of jump into the bigger topic, you want to help us set the stage on this concept of biophilic design and kind of where that plays in this whole story?
Yeah, so so often we're designing spaces certainly with function in mind. Moving people through spaces, doing so forth. And often what we're doing is doing it with hard materials, and not really looking for opportunities to kind of bring the live environment into spaces. We kind of look at plant material and that kind of thing as a way to kind of put off to the edges and to beautify a location, but it actually can be very functional. So from a biophilic design standpoint, it's using live walls, it's using even products like ours to kind of create and frame spaces within a property, to bring that living environment back into the building. And particularly in light of the pandemic and everything else that we've been through, that desire for freshness, fresh air, those types of things is more in demand than ever before.
As somebody, so growing up, I had no interest in doing anything outside if it wasn't sports. So anytime my dad would wake me up to go mow the grass, that was like my worst moment of the week, or tend to the garden or things like that. But as I got older and I went to college, I worked on the grounds crew at a golf course, mainly for the free golf.
Me too. Yeah.
Yep. And also I worked for another landscaping company, building like rock gardens and doing things like that. With all of that, experience I had in college, it really made me love doing that kind of work. And, even if it's not, making your own garden, why do you think it's important to have a like a good landscape in the built environment? Whether or not it's a garden where it's producing food or not.
Yeah, and by the way, I grew up doing the same thing at a golf course, so I totally get it. I just think there's a natural instinct, whether anybody wants to acknowledge they like doing the work or not. There's a comforting aspect to seeing plant materials. It's the softness, it's being able to watch something grow and change, as opposed to a statue or a painted wall or a lamp in the corner or whatever it may be. It just brings us back to nature, just to our very core. So I think people truly enjoy that.
I mean, there's a lot of things that you hear about, even people taking a nature baths or whatever, where they just walk outside and they go or forest bathing and they walk through the forest, and the all of the stuff that you get just from being around nature is important. So it's interesting to see that we're finally incorporating it into our design further.
Yeah, I mean, so think about it. When you're having a tough moment, what oftentimes you do, you stand up and you get up and go, I got to get some air. I got to go for a walk for a second, whatever. That's just our natural course of being.
Yep. So we kind of mentioned it, but can you kind of help us understand, like, what is vertical farming necessarily?
Yeah, so when we think of traditional farming, we've got soil, we've got land that's needed, obviously sunlight, water, all those types of things. But even in that environment, you're limited in terms of the crops you can grow by certain seasons, the amount of harvest that you're going to get, that kind of thing. What vertical farming does is it is a soilless farming system. And there's a number of different ways to do it and systems to do it, but all of them are soilless systems that allow you to go vertical. So for instance, with our system, we can farm an acre's worth of produce in less than 4,000 feet. So 10% of the land, and we are much more efficient in the sense that we use 90% less water in this, because it's a circulating water system that stays in space with the plant material and so forth. So it is a much more efficient way to do it. Plus, the ability to farm indoors vertically allows year-round growth. It allows multiple harvests a year. In our case, we've got a harvest coming off of our farms every single month that go to our clients and tenants. So it's a faster system and very much cleaner in terms of when you think about the romaine, lettuce, and all the things that kind of get recalled. Most of that is soil-borne illnesses and so forth, and we just don't have any of that. So it's a cleaner and healthier system, an easier system to manage inside of an urban environment.
Are all those harvests for the local people, or are those getting then shipped somewhere?
Well, it's kind of fun. Our program is built around the idea that we're in that space. Property management company has hired us to put those farms in place. We're there every week farming them. And then once a month, we have the event where we have the harvest and everybody lines up and gets their produce and, recipe cards and all different types of things. So what ends up happening is I kind of joke, I'm going to age myself a little bit, but, it kind of goes back to the pet rock days, right? Where you just had this thing where you just wanted to carry your rock around. I mean, everybody loves the farms. And whenever times we have to move them somewhere on a property due to a renovation or whatever, property managers always laugh because they'll tell us, we get phone calls, did you take our farm away? No. And in light of the pandemic too, when that happened, we needed to pull all of our farms back. But what was great was 90% of our clients stayed with us and continued to have their farm, if you will, in our greenhouses. And we provided all of that to the City of Refuge, which is a local organization here that helps folks. So we do donate quite a bit of produce from our farms as well. So it's a good blend of making people happy and meeting people's needs as well.
You mentioned how you kind of changed during the pandemic. When we first met and talked a little bit, you talked about some of the things the pandemic kind of opened our eyes to in terms of food and how vertical farming and may help solve those problems. Can you speak a little bit to some of the challenges we saw come out of the
Yeah.
pandemic?
Yeah, and to back up a little bit on that, leading into that, every major metropolitan area has a city planning unit that is focused on the future of that city and what we're going to look like. And they're looking at infrastructure and power and housing and all those types of things. What many of them realized at one point was that one of the major pieces they had left out of it was the food side of things. And when you look at resiliency in case of a disaster, how resilient are we? They had forgotten about it. So many of them are beginning to bring urban ag directors into the program as well. And so that focus is on food deserts or food insecurity areas, places where folks can't get to food readily. If they're not within a mile's walking distance of a grocery store, most of the time what they're going to do is end up buying their food at a local market or whatever it may be, a gas station. And what do they not have there? Fresh food, right? Typically, it's a lot of processed food, which leads to health and disease issues and all the other things. So food deserts are a really major issue. And you can pretty much look up a map of any major metropolitan area. You'd be shocked to see how many food deserts there are right around us. With that being said, what the pandemic also did was, for the first time, many folks realized that their food doesn't actually come from a grocery store. Because once you walked into the grocery store and went, wait a minute, where is everything? All of a sudden, food insecurity became an issue for everyone.
Yeah, and you can't grow toilet paper either.
No, you cannot. No, you cannot. And so, this idea of not only having local produce, but actually having it hyper local. I mean, it is literally in the lobby. It's right here. I'm good. That begins to resonate more and more with people. So we're talking to a lot of developers right now about building greenhouses on new developments, partially just for the amenity, but also to kind of have the farm for that location. It's our farm. And it also addresses some of the food insecurity issues that could crop up again if something happens.
Yeah, you mentioning the pandemic and retaining 90% of your customers. I feel like, more than ever during the pandemic, what you all did was really important, because I read that, communities have the option to help with the maintenance.
Right.
And I bet that was a great escape for a lot of people, being able to go out to their community garden and, help out with it and just get out of their, apartment.
Yeah, we did a lot of videos too, and sent them off to our clients, teaching people how to do some things at home to be able to kind of do it while they were there. We created drive-through harvests as well, so that people could come by and literally just pull up in their car, and we'd hand them their harvest for that time. So we kept engaged with everybody. The nice thing is now every single client has us back on their properties. So we're excited about that.
Are you seeing an increase in these commercial properties, whether they be multifamily or something else, adopting this idea of having greenhouses on site?
So every single developer, as a matter of fact, I'm meeting with another one today that I've talked about with this. It is a different kind of concept. Our program, if you think about it, traditional office building, everybody's kind of done the fitness center, they've done the coffee shop, they've done the business center, done all those types of things. This is the first thing that really kind of provides something for everyone, and they can take it home with them. Got so many developers that are really intrigued with this idea. And as we've presented it to them, it's kind of a dual purpose facility. You can segregate the facility in such a way that part of it is the greenhouse, the growing greenhouse, but part of it is also could be a restaurant. It could be a community gathering space. It could be, any number of things that become an amenity for that property. And every one of them is really intrigued. And what I've told them all is this: one of you is actually going to do it. You're going to be the first one to do it. And once that person does it, then the rest of you are going to be knocking on my door going, we got to do this. This is really cool.
Oh yeah, I mean, especially is like there seems to be like a growing wave of people that are more conscious about what they put in their bodies, what they eat. You're seeing more and more organic brands pop up. I even saw like a clean medicine company the other day. So I would expect that more people would enjoy the opportunity to go to a restaurant that they could see the farm behind, the greenhouse behind,
Yeah.
and see where all their stuff's coming from. And then, how does that maybe that, is there an application where grocery stores start to make their own produce?
And that is happening right now. There are some locations that are doing that. We've actually got some folks that we're talking to about that. I believe out of the West Coast, I think it's Kroger and some other folks are testing that kind of thing right now. And so I do think you will see some of that coming for sure. Are you guys familiar with ESG?
Mm-mm.
I often
Enlighten
ask that
us.
question. Yeah, I often ask that question. Most people don't know, but everybody better get really focused on this. ESG is an acronym that stands for environmental, social, and governance. Okay, it is a measuring stick for businesses and how they operate. As it relates to sustainability, as it relates to their people and diversity and training issues and so forth, and then how they govern their business from a transparency standpoint, and the things that they share with the world about what they're about. Many companies, particularly in the real estate world, are drilled down and focused on it. And if you go to their websites, they have ESG statements, ESG scorecards, so forth. Larry Fink, who is the head of BlackRock, that has something like 9 billion square feet of assets or whatever, $9 trillion I think it is worth of assets, it's flat out said, if you're not focused on ESG, you're not with us. Banking systems, everybody else is looking at this from the standpoint that they can get credit by working with companies that are focused on ESG. What we do by bringing that built environment, by bringing health, wellness, produce, those types of things, that dovetails nicely with everybody's ESG initiatives. So that is another point that we're making with folks, and that is going to be a bigger issue for all architects, designers, engineers. They're going to have to be focused on the ESG initiatives.
I could see, especially when we hear all these other like climate initiatives that AIA puts out, people are always going for LEED, Green Globe, all those things. But at the same time, we're asking more people to be more environmentally conscious, no matter what it is. And so it makes sense that there is this ESG is kind of a big thing that people are going to start to expect. And once a few people start to demand it, everyone else kind of has to fall in line.
Well, the other thing that is also out there is Well and Fitwell. Are you familiar with those?
Mm-mm.
Okay, so where everybody's familiar with LEED, focused on the energy and those types of things. Well and Fitwell are two groups that are focused on the wellness of the people inside of those buildings. So how does your building support wellness type initiatives? And it's everything from the air that's circulated in there, to the water systems, to the food you have on the property, entire list of things. So just as buildings became LEED certified, there are the two competing groups right now is Well and Fitwell, and people are starting to get those certifications as well. The pandemic also obviously drove that even more. So I think ultimately it's going to be one of those two is going to be the lead of wellness on properties.
Yeah, being able to simulate, airflow, being able to, we're so concerned about congregations of people now after the pandemic. And so it makes a lot of sense that there's the idea of like the healthy building. It makes a lot of sense that we want to make sure that even now we're designing buildings that can be sustainable and consistently healthy. And so that, having at least the biophilic design component to it makes a lot of sense, because we bring all of that outdoors, indoors.
Yeah, it is amazing. How many buildings did we build that you couldn't possibly open a window in those buildings? And now everybody's trying to figure out how to build buildings where we can open the windows. So,
oh yeah,
It certainly has changed.
For a long time, it seemed like just to be able to see nature. I mean, there's been a lot of studies like in the medical profession of seeing nature helps you heal faster. But now we recognize like there's something to be said about just openness and having all this indoor air or outdoor air in. And, our home here has an attic fan, which we never really used before for some reason. And it's a newer home, but they put it in there
Fabulous, yeah.
anyway. And it's the most amazing thing ever to be able to pull all this outdoor air into the house, and then you realize like how stale that indoor air really is. So then you add a bunch of plants on top of that, you're really starting to go towards a healthier building.
Absolutely. It's getting back to nature inside the building.
Absolutely.
So in that same vein, one of the things that really interests me is the water conservation piece of what you all do. Some people say water is going to be the next oil, and we don't have to get into that. But you said that 90% of the water is reused. So this may be a dumb question, but that recycled water, are there more nutrients in that for the plants? And also, what is the process like to, get something like that set up on an existing building?
Very good question. And with my other company, my landscape company, we are seeing a tremendous wasting of water and through irrigation systems for many years. We created a whole different division called No Water. It's KNOW water from that standpoint to try to teach people how to use water more efficiently. And I agree with you about the oil concept. Yes, in terms of this enclosed system, basically we have a 20-gallon reservoir at the bottom of our system and a small pump. That pump turns on for about 3 minutes at a time, pulls all the water to the very top, and it has a system inside where it just allows that to trickle down onto the roots. Unlike traditional farming and unlike hydroponic farming, where the roots are constantly in water, ours are also out in the open air inside of the system. So it's a very clean, you could actually eat the roots on these things. So the nutrients in the air as well as the nutrients in the water continue to recycle in this whole thing, as well as the minerals and so forth that we add to it, the natural minerals. So yes, it's a very nutrient dense. Most of us, if you've gone to the grocery store and you bought the little the basil plant, right? Everybody's bought a basil plant at some point and put that on their counter and said, "Woo, I'm doing great. I got natural stuff right here in my house." I thought that was cool too, until I was able to pull a basil plant right out of our system and bring it inside of my home. It's pungent. The aroma is amazing. The flavor is incredible. And so what you begin to realize is the difference in nutrients of something that is hyper local, that is grown right there, and not something that's been harvested weeks before, sat in a warehouse, transported across the country. Just think of the carbon footprint of that kind of thing. It's massive. And so not only are you helping the environment through something like this from a water and a carbon footprint standpoint, but you're getting better produce, tastes better, and it's more nutrient dense. It's a healthier way to live.
Oh yeah. Yeah. We had a guest come on and we talked about embodied carbon kind of on the job site. And it was amazing to hear, a lot of people, I think, just out of sight, out of mind, perhaps, I don't know, about the amount of carbon that goes into creating all the materials that we use. And so being able to bring things closer to a site, closer to a building, it definitely seems to have a huge impact on that carbon footprint.
Well, and if you could see a map, and I can't show that to you right now, but there are basically around the world, there's 7 different Mediterranean climates that is the perfect scenario to grow most of the produce that we consume, around the world. If you look at those Mediterranean climates, most of them, with the exception of California, are not right next to population centers. So pretty much anything that's grown in Chile or wherever it may be, that stuff has to be shipped. Just the amount of travel for that one tomato that's sitting in the grocery store is incredible. How long it takes it to get there.
Do you all have, you mentioned your harvest takes about a month, do you have a typical plant that you do? I mean, is it anything, what does kind of the typical harvest look like?
So in an aeroponic vertical system, because we have no soil, we can't grow things like, can't grow root vegetables. So things like potatoes or onions or carrots and those kinds of things, even though we are experimenting with some carrots in some interesting ways. So everything that comes off of ours are leafy greens, such as, obviously lettuces. We've probably got 20 different varieties of lettuces. Herbs, God knows how many different types of herbs we grow. And then hardy greens, things like greens and kales and those types of things. So we grow all of that on the property. And in our greenhouses, we grow all the fruiting plants. It's easier to manage those inside of our environment. Those would be the tomatoes, the peppers, cucumbers, all those types of things. And we bring those to the harvest when it's harvest day. So it's a well-rounded harvest for everybody.
So what's the difference between how you have your greenhouse set up and then like what's on site at a building?
So we farm exactly the same way in our greenhouse as we do on the properties. The difference is on a property, our system at the tallest, it's probably 6 to 6.5 feet tall. The towers themselves. In our greenhouses, they're about 8 to 9 feet tall. So it's a really pretty spectacular view when you see when you plant a tomato plant at home, you put it in the ground and let it grow up, and you put that little cage around it and this, that, and the other. We do it the exact opposite. It's at the very top of that, and it cascades down, and we grow that way. So it's a really unique and pretty cool way to see things. And when we grow on the properties, people have asked me, well, it's right here in the lobby. What if somebody touches this stuff? And I said, well, when you go to the grocery store and you pick up that tomato, do you have any idea how many people have touched that tomato before you did? None. You have no idea at all. So what do? When you go home, you wash it, right? Same kind of gig. And I think we can teach society that to be healthier and to get that hyperlocal thing, the ability to grow right there is going to be a completely accepted thing in our society in no time.
Do you see there being a residential component to the vertical farming concept?
Oh, no question. No question. There, our system. We have people that we sell them to for their own use at their homes. The biggest difference is, in our case, is our farmers. They're extremely well trained. No matter what system you do, whether you do traditional farming or vertical farming or whatever it may be, you still have the same pest and disease issues that you deal with, fungus or insects and so forth. When we grow our seedlings and we grow in our greenhouses, 95% of all of our pest control is done by beneficial insects. We don't really spray anything at all, and anything we do is natural, and that might just be for a fungus that might show up or that kind of thing. But really cool to kind of learn about the natural environment and seeing those beneficial insects taking care of the problem insects, if you will. So we've started to present that to our properties as well. We have little blister packs that we can put that contain some of the beneficial insects right on the towers inside the property. It's another really cool learning environment for people.
Yeah, when I think about things like farming, I don't think about beneficial insects. And come to think of it, I could use a few beneficial insects around here. So you mentioned how people are starting to approach you before the building is even being built. So you've already got the installation on existing buildings going. When doing it with new construction, does that just open up so many more possibilities because you kind of have more of an input on the ideal way to have it situated within the building?
No question. I mean, I'm trained as a landscape architect, so getting in on the front end of a project and helping to plan, it makes it so much more effective. One of the tools that we use with everybody is we have some 3D graphic artists that work with us, and so we'll take pre-construction design images and so forth, and we'll input farming looks on top of that, talking to folks about the greenhouses and whether or not it's a rooftop type of installation, or is it kind of a, does it become kind of the central amenity in the middle of that community? We've got one client that we have he has 4 different buildings. We have farms in every one of his buildings on a property, and he's going to redevelop that entire space. And that's one of the guys that we're talking about. Maybe instead of spreading it around the different buildings, why don't we get a community greenhouse? So being able to be on the front end of that is a huge help to all of us, to them as well as us.
Have you seen one application that kind of is used more than others, like on a building? Is it always on a rooftop? Or are you seeing more one versus the other?
Well, in Atlanta, we can farm outdoors, generally call it April to end of October, based on weather. Part of the reasoning that we built the greenhouses originally was that we thought people for the wintertime would like us to take the farms, put them up in our greenhouses and continue to grow and bring the harvest to their clients. Well, what we discovered was the vast majority, well over 90% of them said, no, don't take the farm away. Please try to find a space to do it inside. We have a lighting system that we're able to use with that. And what we're finding is indoor farming in those lobbies. That is the space that most of the time these companies want it. And it turns into a very visible amenity. Everybody's walking into that building. They're walking by, they see it growing every week. The leasing people seeing that when they're walking in thinking, that's really cool. So most of the time it's indoors, even during the outdoor planting season.
I think it's cool because I know in my like past life when I worked for a design firm, we would create green walls instead of inside medical office buildings. But now in a way you can kind of double up on that functionality, because now it could be sort of, so to speak, a green wall, but then it has a more functional application.
Yeah, the green walls are beautiful and I love them. But what ultimately ends up happening is it gets to be that thing that everybody just walks by every day and doesn't really pay much attention to. It's oftentimes no different than a picture hanging on that wall. And with this type of system, everybody's engaged with it. Every time they walk by it, they see a different thing. They see it growing and they realize that I hope I get to take that piece of produce home with me on Friday when the harvest comes about.
It's such a cool concept. I know this summer I went and visited my wife's grandparents in Iowa, and they have a senior living. They're in a senior living facility, and near her grandparents, they had an outdoor community garden. But for all of these grandparent age people who've gone to these senior living facilities, a lot of them were used to having their own gardens, their own way of doing stuff, and then to be able to, even in a small scale community garden, be able to have access to all of that seemed to be such a huge impact. So I could really see how it starts to take up even in, senior livings and all of these things that are getting popped up.
Yeah, it's what's interesting when one of our very first harvests, we handed some produce to a gentleman, nicely wrapped up. Thank you for coming today. And he looked at it and he said, well, I've been watching this grow. And he said, so I can eat this? Is that right? And we're like, yes, indeed, that's what this is all about. So what we realized was we can't just hand this to people. We need to educate people as well. So we do a lot of video work. We have recipe cards and other things to teach people. I just handed you some Swiss chard, but what do I do with Swiss chard? Well, here's how you can use it and that kind of thing. And you're right, we do have a lot of senior living facilities. And that is a different dimension from the standpoint that it is often a reminder for those folks who might have had a little plot at home that they farmed and so forth. It brings a different kind of joy to them. We had one young lady, I will say, at a senior living facility who was so proud of the fact that she had been eating off of her lettuce one leaf at a time for 4 weeks and was so impressed with it. And so she's one of our biggest fans now.
It's so cool.
Yeah, it seems like, Copiana's doing a lot of good things in terms of helping with, food insecurity, reducing the food deserts. It's also environmentally friendly because you're not using more water than you need to, and you're using it as efficiently as possible.
Right.
But it seems like more than anything, it helps to build a sense of community. And that's something that's really needed. So
Well,
just it brings a smile to a lot of people's faces, all these stories that you're telling. It just seems like it makes people really happy to have access to this and be able to be a part of it.
I'm really glad you picked up on that, because that is one of our central selling points, is the fact that it really builds a sense of community. I mean, we have some buildings that are single tenant. It's State Farm facility, for instance, is one that, it's all of their employees there. So, but then we have many multi-tenant buildings, and you have folks that have never spoken to each other. They walk by each other in that building, have no reason to even know each other, but they'll gather around that farm and start talking about it and looking at it. We had one client that had an old smoker's hut that was in a courtyard in between two buildings, and we turned that into a farm, and now it's a gathering space around that. So that sense of community is really important. A lot of people are spending a little bit of time at the office now and not as much. We overheard somebody at a harvest the other day, two people standing there. One person looked at the other one and said, "I thought you weren't coming in today." And they're like, "No, it's harvest day. I always come in on harvest day." So, so it does build that sense of community for sure.
Giving people a reason to go back to the office. You've talked a lot about how your farmers are well educated, your team is educating those that come to the harvest. How internally at Copiana, how have you adopted this idea of continuous improvement to be able to consistently research new trends, or what is it you all are doing to make sure you're sort of staying up on whatever is current in this field?
That's a great question. So as I mentioned earlier, I have a landscape company, been in that business for 32 years. And so it's a pretty well-oiled machine. And if you decided you wanted to start a landscape company, there are tons of resources to teach you how to do that. What we're doing right now is a very unique model. At the moment, I think we are the only company in the country that's doing what we're doing. So there were no resources to figure out how to do this. And so we had to figure it all out ourselves, a lot of trial and error. Some of the things that we discovered by farming inside of buildings, you don't really necessarily realize pest pressure with people walking in and out, things come off their clothing, that kind of thing. And so we had to really kind of learn how to deal with all of that. So a lot of trial and error. We failed in a lot of ways early on. But we know the system, we know the recipe now that works really, really well. It's not a complicated process for our farmers, but timing is everything. If you let something get behind, we have a problem. So we're very diligent in making sure that we're on top of what's happening on those farms at all times, just as you would with any farm.
When you as we wrap up here, as you look to the future of what vertical farming is, and even what you all are looking at, is there anything that's got you really excited, or future applications that got you really excited?
Yeah, it is really, what's interesting to me is you're seeing some massive scale farming, indoor vertical farming companies, AeroFarms, Plenty, Gotham Greens, all these companies. And these are really focused on mass production. One of the interesting ones, probably the most interesting one I find, is App Harvest, which is a company that's up in Appalachia. They have taken folks that didn't necessarily, old coal miners, all those types of things, and turned them into farmers. They've got 64 acres under glass where they're growing tomatoes and that kind of thing. AeroFarms, those kind of companies have 30-foot high beds of things inside of warehouses. So you're getting more and more of this coming, but that's not really, they're at a scale where you'll find those products in a grocery store. What I do think is going to be one of the trends is trying to get it local, the hyper local concept. Have people be able to see, feel, learn about, and become a part of their community that way, and bringing farming in. I think you're going to see more and more and more of that. You are going to see one of these greenhouses up, and I promise you, as soon as you do, I'm going to get calls all over the country about this.
I hope you do. And I'm sure, it may not be in our lifetime, but if we ever go to something like Mars or the moon, the concept of vertical farming seems like a perfect fit.
Oh yeah, it's critical. Yeah, there's no other choice. Absolutely.
So anything you got, Jackson?
I just wanted to say that I've been inspired to go buy a planter box. And, really what I wanted to do was start raising monarch butterflies, but now I want to start, growing cucumbers. So this has been a really enlightening discussion.
Oh,
And I admire what you all are doing over at Copiata. I think it's a great concept. And, I think it's going to bring people together in urban environments, and also, help them to save some time and not have to go to the grocery store for all their produce, because
and
they can get
stay
it.
healthier. Yep,
They can get it from their own house.
that's right. Absolutely.
Well, Jim, we appreciate you joining us.
Well, I really appreciate it. It's been a lot of fun. You guys are great, and I love what you're doing. You got so many great episodes, and the disruptors aspect of it is really, really important, because whether you like it or not, change is inevitable. It's just whether you grow with it or not. So I think you guys are doing a great job, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be part of the team.
Yes, sir. Well, we appreciate that.